Good afternoon, and welcome everybody to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the educational collaborative of international schools established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in 78 countries. My name is Georgie McIntyre and I am the Chief Learning Officer at ECIS, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions via the chat box or via the Q&A questions. As part of the ECIS community, we have a number of key partners who provide support and services to our schools community. ECIS are extremely proud to partner with Dragonfly to bring you this webinar today and to help you find out more about our Transforming the Teacher virtual professional development courses. Melody Lowe is passionate about nurturing a lifelong love of learning in both children and adults, developing leadership potential and creating an educational climate that offers opportunities to improve outcomes for all. She believes that education is the key to unlocking potential and addressing inequality, and her training is fun, engaging and stimulating, which I'm hoping we're going to experience today. She's a qualified teacher, senior leader, head teacher and improvement advisor who's worked both in independent and state sectors. This experience enables Melody to work with a diverse range of settings on improving the quality of teaching, unlocking the potential of your school and developing the capacity from within, including teaching assistants. Unlocking the potential of teaching assistants and HLTAs is one of the most significant acts any school leader can do to improve children's attainment. The recent pandemic has caused many schools to rethink their use of additional adults in the classroom. Social distancing, safety measures and smaller class sizes have made it crucial to upskill all people working with children. Therefore, we would like to share with you today, and I hand over top tips for teaching assistants. Thank you for joining us, and I hand over to Melody.
Thank you, Georgie. And hello, everybody from wherever in the world that you are. As Georgie says, unlocking the potential of all the adults who are working with the children in these difficult times is now key to improve outcomes for children and also for the performance of your school. So what are we going to do today? Well, as well as the top tips, we're going to think about your role and responsibility as a TA, HLTA, and look at your deployment and the impact that you can have. We're going to think about some models of good practice that maximise the contribution to the learning of your pupils you work with and how you facilitate talk with those pupils. And more importantly, we're going to be thinking about the successful intervention and support, what I call the preparedness for your role. So what actually is the purpose of a TA, a support assistant, an HLTA? Well, your role is to raise standards by support for the pupil, the teacher, the curriculum, and support for the school. Yet a recent report by Ofsted here in the UK said that many teaching assistants weren't being used effectively. And despite many schools investing a lot of money in teaching assistants, there was little evidence to prove that the teaching assistants actually made a difference to outcomes and the quality of learning and progress for those children. So what do we actually do? Well, a TA works in partnership with the teaching staff. It acts as an assistant to the teacher, is a specialist in additional needs, plans with the teacher and has a clear role at every stage of the lesson. And it also leads assessment for learning for the teacher. So on a scale of 1 to 10, just have a think about those 6 things and just grade yourself where you think you might be in each of those roles. And when you've done that, think about what you would change in each of those to bring those closer to a 10. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to think about that and think about what you might want to get out of today, and maybe if you are thinking of signing up for the whole course, thinking about which areas you would like to concentrate on, as this is an introduction to a longer set of webinars, the number 8 that follows this, which are going to cover some of those key points. So hopefully by now you've had to think about which areas that you potentially might want to work on, which areas are your strengths. We know the success for teaching assistants relies on 3 key issues: your deployment, your practice, and your preparedness. If you can look at what research says about additional adults in the classroom, but also teaching assistants. You can see there from the Educational Endowment Foundation that when this research was submitted, teaching assistants scored quite lowly in as much as it was expensive in cost per pupil, and in terms of effect, a month's gain in increase in capacity within the curriculum was minimal. However, this research didn't take into account very focused, very trained, and if you think about the way we use teaching assistants more latterly now in the 21st century, and look at the top part there, feedback and metacognition. Part of a TA's role is very much looking at feedback, metacognition, looking at assessment for learning, looking at individual learning, and looking at ability grouping. So you can see all those things that potentially are low in cost but have a maximum effect size for the cost. So let's now look at your deployment as one of those three key areas. So when we think about on the everyday classroom, we're thinking about not just working with lower ability children, we're thinking about working with all children, sometimes even releasing the teacher to work with those who need more support, and you taking some of the higher level learners who need that challenge, that stretch, that coaching to enable them to reach their full potential. So what we're looking for with teaching assistants is that you add value to the work of teachers and you're not replacing them. Now, in these difficult times, I know lots of schools have gone to smaller class sizes and are using teaching assistants as teachers for small groups. And so therefore, we need to think about what training you have in terms of learning, managing the learning environment, managing their behaviours, and managing the content and delivery and the assessment for learning. Your role as a teaching assistant is to help children develop independent learning skills and be fully prepared for whatever the lesson content is. Quite often, teaching assistants deliver structured interventions out of class, high quality one-to-one or maybe small group support. And some of these interventions can be around phonics, can be around reading, can be around maths, basic skills to enable the children to catch up, or it may be some pre-learning to enable them to take part in the core part of the lesson. The important thing with both of those, classroom context and delivering structured intervention, is the links that you make for the children to enable them to see what you are teaching them and how that is relevant to what they are learning with the classroom teacher. So they don't see an intervention or your support as a bolt-on, they see it as part of the learning to enable them to be more effective. So when we're thinking about your deployment, you will be supporting the teacher with routine things. You will be organising the classroom, you'll be managing behaviour, you may be supporting children with emotional and physical needs, you may actually be involved in parent liaison. But all those are non-pedagogical, very important, but we're not talking there about the semantics of teaching. If you look on the other side, on the right-hand side, we're looking about how you support SEN children, how you do intervention support, how you provide learning support actually in the classroom, and how you lead classrooms, which is very much a pedagogical issue. That's the basic bones of teaching. How do you deliver a lesson? How do you use assessment for learning to tweak that lesson? So let's now think about the practice that you have and what you're doing in terms of your day-to-day work. So we know that strategies that encourage independent learning is making sure you give the right support at the right time and in the right amount, and making sure that pupils are still comfortable with taking risks with their learning. There's a skill there in using open-ended questions, and certainly one of our future webinars will be looking at questioning in great detail. We're going to cover a little bit today, just to give you a flavour, but that using skilled questioning can be the key to moving a child's learning on. The important thing with encouraging and supporting learning is giving the least amount of help to support the people so that they still retain the ownership, so that they still are in the right frame to be successful. So what are the things we need to avoid? Well, obviously, we need to avoid prioritising task completion. Now, I think the days when teaching assistants used to finish work for children is long past. But equally, the learning is sometimes more important than the task completion. Repeating what the teacher says. Why is that? Well, quite often a child will think, I don't need to listen to what the teacher is saying because Mrs. Jones, who's coming to support me later, will tell me it all over again. So you want to make sure you don't stereotype. That it's all right to reframe and rephrase and paraphrase and summarise for a child the anticipated needs that the teacher's looking for. However, not stereotyping. Over prompting and spoon feeding, and I've put in there over scaffolding as well. Sometimes our children surprise us with the amount of independence that they can actually have. So within that, thinking about the questions and thinking about the thinking time, it's very tempting, isn't it, to dive in straight away as soon as you've asked a question. Try this out one day and see how long you actually wait to actually expect the answer. You'll be surprised because even the most experienced teacher finds a wait longer than 10 seconds a long time. So play a game with your teacher and see if you can increase the wait time, because wait time is thinking time. And some of these children we work with need extra thinking time. And also, again, going back to questions, thinking about the use of closed questions. So questions that just need a yes/no answer. Thinking how you reframe those questions. Making sure that you use a Bloom's taxonomy of questions for these children. So you're asking some of the higher order questions, not just knowledge-based, not just remembering questions, but questions which enable them to synthesize, to create, and to do some of that higher order thinking. So let's think about some features of good practice. So what can happen if you've got a chatty group of children? So I call it closing down people talk. So that involves sort of spoon feeding the children, supplying the answers, low order closed questions, leading statements. So examples of that are things like the answer is 1,000. It starts with a which of these shapes is a square? So actually really leading them rather than encouraging them to think through the answers themselves. And prioritising task completion. Well, obviously, we don't want to say we've got to get this done, we've got 5 minutes. We want to give these children time to think things through themselves. We need to open up the pupil talk, to motivate, to promote, to give cognitive focus and engagement with the task, because that will give you your higher order questions. So the who, what, where, why, when, how. What do you mean when you describe the prince as posh? Drawing on prior learning, linking the content of learning to prior lessons. So actually bringing a quick revision, a recap at the beginning so that they can see the context of where it fits. And providing explanations over clarity and accuracy. Managing people behaviour can be really important for small groups of children. So actually making sure that we react in the way that is enabling a child to focus. So why don't you come and join us is useful. So what do effective teaching assistants, pupil interactions look like? Well, there's 2 dimensions to those. Talked about questioning, so effective questioning skills, but also that supporting and developing pupils' independence and learning skills. So, in order to develop your questioning, we've got to know what quality questioning looks like. Observing what is good practice is really important. Avoiding unproductive questions. And sometimes using a question bank can help. Now, that can help if your teacher has planned questions, so having a look at the day-to-day plan, the long-term plan. A question matrix can be quite useful, something like this. This enables you to think about those higher order questions. Now, I do have some templates for you if you would like these. You drop your email to Georgie, we'll make sure you get these templates. So as the general level of difficulty increases, a what is question is actually easier question, i.e. a knowledge, a remembering question, if we're linking it back to Bloom's, rather than a create question, a how might question. So you can see as we come to the bottom right-hand side, that's a lot more effective question than something which is a what or a where question. I've worked with a lot of schools and using Bloom's taxonomy, but also one of the things I find quite useful to use is linking solo taxonomy, particularly for teaching assistants, where you can think about where the child is. Obviously, at the first circle level, what we call the starting level, the pre-structural level, that's the children who will always say to you, can you help me start? And they're the children that need the remembering type questions. I don't know anything about this, they'll say. And then you need to make those links for them so they can start and begin the task. If they're a unistructural learner, that's the single bar, they're looking at how they can define, they probably listen to a class explanation, they can describe one idea. That's the child quite often who will put their hand up, me, yes, I've got an idea. But it is only one idea, and have to talk through the idea. Or if we're solving a maths problem, maybe just a one-step procedure. A multistructural person is a person who's got lots of ideas, but they might not necessarily know how to link those ideas together. And your skill as a teaching assistant is to help them make those links. You can see you need to have a good knowledge yourself of the content of what is being taught. If we're moving into our higher order question, which is where 21st century learners, we're talking now about skills as opposed to knowledge, we're thinking about how we actually encourage our learners to think creatively. Employers are really looking for people, and universities are really looking for people who can apply knowledge, who can take it that one step further. And they're the people who, what I call the relational learners, those people who give explanations, they can compare, they can contrast. Again, a different style of question in order to demonstrate that. And then what we've got at the very top of our sort of tree is the extended abstract. And they're the people who can take that information and create something new with it. They can apply their ideas to new contexts and across subjects. And an effective teaching assistant will help make those links for pupils. So, thinking about independence and independent thinking skill, it's a real skill as a teaching assistant to understand how different people learn, knowing what to do when and knowing not what to do, and encouraging people to draw on their own knowledge and understanding and find things out for themselves. And I link that to a mastery model. If you can think about when you're learning something new, when you start to learn something new, you don't know it. So you are unconscious, incompetent. I.e., if you pick up a bike for the first time, a bicycle for the first time, you might not necessarily know how to ride it, but you don't know you can't ride it. You then become consciously incompetent because you realise when you get on the bike that you're likely to fall off it because you don't know how to balance, you don't know how to pedal, you don't know that you have to look ahead. So you become unconsciously incompetent. Now, quite often, some of the children we work with are consciously incompetent. They don't realise what they need to do. We've also got then moving into our sort of conscious competency, i.e. they've got the building blocks of what they need to know. They are very sort of clear in what they do, but they're not quite sure they have to think through the process all the time. So if you go back to riding a bike, you'd be saying to yourself, I need to look ahead, I need to hold onto the handlebars, I need to push my pedals around. And only true learning, i.e. mastery learning, which is where as teaching assistants you want your children to be, is when we become unconsciously competent, i.e. the learning flows. I'm sure you've all heard of a state of flow. That's when children can really start to learn within their creativity level. They start to enjoy learning. And as a good teaching assistant, that's the level you want to get your children to. You want them to really enjoy and take that learning further. So moving from that unconscious, incompetent to that unconscious competency. and the steps you need to take to get them there. And that's all linked to growth mindset with some of the children we work with. Now, obviously, Carol Dweck's done a lot of work on growth mindset. I will cover this on one of the later webinars, but I just thought it'd be useful for you to just think about this at this stage as one of our top tips, is how do you encourage children to actually have that growth mindset? Now, depending on the type of children you are supporting, you may find some of the children have a fairly low self-esteem. So thinking about, what questions can I rephrase for them in order for them to have a growth mindset and really believe and challenge themselves. And linked to that is thinking skills, is actually making sure that we're using not only a taxonomy of thinking and trying to get higher order questions, but where in the thinking skills chart are we? If you've got a child who's very good at evaluating information, well, let's have a think about sort of how they compare and contrast, and do we need to work down that part of the tree? Or if they're very creative, but how do they ask relevant questions? Let's move down the inquiry-based part of the tree. So again, something else I'm going to cover at a later date, but really useful to think about how you're developing the thinking skills of the children. I mentioned earlier it's really good to have prompts. Now, in some of the schools that I was leading and managing as a head teacher, I was a great one for believing in working walls and making sure that the walls supported the learning for the children and created independence. And if you have prompts around the room, if you haven't got a room to sit in and you're in a breakout area, well, a prompt on a laminated sheet is really useful to prompt children's learning. It can also support you as well in asking the right question at the right time. Again, just some ideas there. A question like, that's interesting, what makes you say that, can really unpick a child's thinking. So get used to using prompts with the children, either in your environment or just having them on a sheet. So now I want to talk about actually supporting our children. What we actually do if you're a teaching assistant, what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I've split that into these 6 different areas. I've split it into relaying, zoning, coaching, facilitating, supervising, and safeguarding. And at any one time, you will be doing one of these, if not more than one. So let's look at relaying first. That's when you're moving periodically between students identified maybe by yourself or by the teacher who need additional support due to maybe their additional needs. How do you support and identify those particular students? I'm just going to give you a minute to think about that. How do you identify them? Is it the teacher identifying them, or are you using assessment for learning to identify them? How do you discuss those needs with the class teacher? Take a minute to think about it. So relaying, really important. A skill to make sure you identify those people who need the support, who perhaps need a bit of consolidation, of summarising, paraphrasing of what the teacher was talking about, not that stereo talk we were talking about earlier. But supporting those children, maybe who have additional needs, to be part of the whole class teaching. So now let's think about zoning. So that's when you locate yourself near a group of students with additional needs and actually providing that input to the group. So if you're working in a class this term, when we get back to school in the next couple of days, where are you going to position yourself in that class to maximise your zone? And again, how are you going to discuss that with the class teacher as where you feel that is the most important place for you to be? I'm not going to give you too much time to think about some of these, because I want you to sort of go away and have a think about these when you're actually doing your role the next few days. Now let's think about coaching. You may be assigned a group or an individual to talk them through a task that they may feel that's particularly difficult. So a teacher may be using a staggered start, so she may be keeping some children on the carpet, she might be letting some children go who can be more independent, and she might have a group who really need some consolidation, some pre-teaching before they can access the learning. So how do you identify those students that are going to need that particular coaching? And when you're going to do it, and how you're going to make sure that coaching you're giving them is linked to the structure and the input that the lesson, so they're getting the same experience as the other children. And again, how are you going to discuss that with the class teacher? So facilitating is another skill which teaching assistants are quite often used for. So that's maybe setting up assistive technology for people, other specialist equipment, maybe adapting resources so that they're more readily available to children with additional needs. It might be that you need to help somebody organise themselves, maybe their coursework, maybe their homework. So how do you identify when you're going to use that drop-in support? You need to make sure that you can operate any machinery, any resources that you potentially need to use with the student. Again, thinking about where's the time for you to discuss that with the class teacher. You may just be in a supervisory role, i.e. those people, if you've got the staggered start in your classroom, or you've got the group who are working on some of those higher challenges, maybe they can be overseeing the ability, the higher ability children, those more independent learners. Do you think that's what a TA should do? Should you be supporting more able students? If you are supporting more able students, then that's an ideal opportunity for the teacher to support those who need some additional learning. So I think it's a good thing that you shouldn't just be supporting less able children, and you should support the top end as well. How do you identify them? Are you relying on the teacher to identify them, or using your own assessment for learning, which will help you identify those more able learners and what type of support that they need? And then we've got the last one here, from a practical point of view, that's safeguarding. So you manage activities which may pose a risk to additional students. Maybe people have got disabilities, maybe a mental impairment, maybe a visual impairment. Are you looking at teachers' planning? Are you making sure that you're picking out the risks? Are you looking at risk assessments to ensure that you can identify appropriate support strategies? You're going back to discuss it with the classroom teacher in order to make the classroom as inclusive as possible for that student, but also make sure that they're learning and not prohibited from accessing the learning. Little saying here for you: behind every teacher is a great teacher's assistant. And in order to be a great teacher's assistant, one of the key things is you have to communicate with your classroom teacher that you're working with. We know as additional adults in the room that you have to know certain things in order to be effective. You need to know the school's policies and procedures so that you're very aware of behaviour management, of health and safety, anything which is going to impact on the learning of those children. You need to have a very clear view of teachers' expectations and align those together so that both of you are on the same page, really, in terms of learning and what the expectation is for the children. You've got to have training to do all this. Teaching assistants are highly skilled, quite often graduates, quite often qualified teachers themselves. And so access to good CPD is really important to keep growing and nurturing yourself. Hence this 8 follow-up sessions we're going to be doing between now and Christmas. In order to be prepared, you need to have that date time for liaison with teachers. And that's really difficult. I know, having sort of been ahead a couple of schools, building timing for teachers to talk to teaching assistants and actually talk through the planning and plan together for eventualities for different types of students is key to success. So how do you flex the system to build in some time to plan? I used to give my teaching assistants time together to plan as a group of teaching assistants, but also time with their own teacher. And that tended to be during assembly time, in the morning. So it might have only been 20 minutes, but it was very valuable and meant that the lesson following that actually worked better because everybody was well prepared. Quite often, as a teaching assistant, you need to prepare additional resources. You might need to differentiate some of the teaching resources that the teacher has planned to use. So you need time to do that. And you might need time to actually plan an intervention and look at the learning needs for the children and plan how you're going to deliver it. And then key to all this is being able to feed back to the teachers, is making sure that the teachers have a very clear understanding of where the children are prior to the intervention and post-intervention, what the impact of that intervention is. And I think I'd also put in there that liaison with the student to ensure that they understand how the intervention impacts on their day-to-day learning, as we mentioned earlier. So making sure they see the connection. They don't just see it as time that, oh, I go out for 20 minutes with Mrs. Jones. It's actually, I go out with 20 minutes with Mrs. Jones because today we're going to be concentrating on sentence construction. And if I concentrate on sentence construction, then I'll be able to write more fluently. I'll be able to move at the same pace as the other children. So this is a good intervention. So in order to do that, we need to plan. And it's useful for teachers to plan lessons where they explicitly set out what they want teaching assistants to achieve, what their precise role is going to be. There's nothing worse than being an additional adult in a classroom and actually not on the same page as the teacher in terms of what they want you to do to support. What the teacher expects from the pupils, what skill they're actually looking at them to acquire, or what understanding you would like the students to have as a result of your intervention, rather than I just want them to complete page 23 of a textbook. And again, going back to that feedback, what the feedback really looks like, what they'd like from the TA at the end of the lesson. I've seen lots of different ways for feedback. Some schools are just sort of verbal feedback. Some schools actually have a recording sheet where a TA will just make little jottings. Some people use pictures, some people use video. So there's lots of different ways you can feed back to the teacher if time is short. Because obviously the teachers are going to then use that feedback to plan the subsequent lesson. So that's a really key part of your role, is developing your ability to feedback effectively. So thinking about challenging the thinking. So what do TAs find challenging when working? And I've done this as a result of talking to lots of TAs. I'm very fortunate that I go to lots of schools, both in the UK and internationally. And these are the things that TAs find the most difficult when they're working in class. A lack of communication about changes or resources. So we're saying key is preparedness. However, if you haven't had an opportunity to get prepared, or the subject lesson has changed, then that role puts you from the start, and you're not going to be able to prepare those students well. Equally, not only you need to be prepared, but that teacher needs to be prepared. Now, I've walked into lots of classrooms where it's obvious that a teacher is not as prepared as perhaps they should be for that lesson. Now, sometimes we can over-prepare, but preparation is really important. Where we want the children to go at the end of that session. We know, because we talk to the children, don't we, about learning intentions and our success criteria. So what that really looks like, unprepared teachers mean unprepared class, mean unprepared pupils, and unprepared teaching assistants. Being expected to manage the behaviour of the students on your own can be a real challenge for teaching assistants. If you're interested in challenging behaviour and managing challenging behaviour, we do have a session coming up between September and Christmas. But it's a skill in managing behaviour and making the class run smoothly. Now, that can sometimes be non-verbal. It can sometimes be proximity to a student. There's all sorts of little techniques you can learn as a TA which will enable you to manage a classroom situation for the teacher. not knowing what you have to do where you're supposed to be. That's interesting because that sort of links to the unprepared teacher. But you do need to maximise your expensive resource. So maximising your time so that you're improving outcomes for children is really important. And being expected to make resources on the spot. Now, as teachers, we are adaptable. We can turn our hand and change the focus of a lesson. But it can be quite difficult if you're working with a child who specifically needs has an additional need and specifically needs resources changing. You do need time to do that effectively. So, what do TAs like? So, just thinking about your own preferences, what do you like about your job as a TA? Just here's 6 little things that I've picked up. Working with different types of children, not just SEN children, as I mentioned earlier, having the opportunity to work with more able children, or the sort of core of the class, as opposed to always working with the SEN children, can be challenging in itself, but actually gives you a broader understanding of how children think, how children learn, and also the subject that you learn. I think really important for teaching assistants is using your initiative. Most teaching assistants love being able to use their own initiative and know that they can go to the teacher if needed for guidance, but they like to get on with the job and support the children in the best way they can. Communication. So where it works well, communication is key. We're going to spend a little bit of time on that at a later date. Thinking about the lesson in advance and thinking about how that fits in with a plan of lessons so you can see where that lesson is going. And being given a lesson plan with clear instructions so that you know exactly what's expected, which group of children, and what you need to do when. And again, good things that TAs like are this opportunity to feedback and discuss with the teachers the pupils' learning after the lesson. That feedback is key. It's good for you because you can see the impact that you've had, but it's good for the teacher because they can then take that to plan future lessons. Just take a minute now to think about what are the things you like about your role. What works well for you or worked well for you last term? You may well be going to work with a different teacher this term, or you may work with a group of teachers across a range of subjects. But what works for you? What works well for you? And if you want to put it on the chat or you want to share that, then we'll try and share that with everybody in the questions and answers. Equally, spend a bit of time about the things that you find challenging in your role. Just make yourself a little bit of a list as to the things that you find challenging and what you might do to change that, and the things that you like and the things that you're going to do more of. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that. Just taking a little bit of an opportunity to have a look at the chat and see what type of things people are asking so that we can try and cover some of that in the question and answer session. So let's just think about those top tips. We titled this presentation as Top Tips for Effective Teaching Assistants. So firstly, teaching assistants need to be vigilant, constantly and continually observing how they can support the teacher in the most useful ways, using one's initiative rather than waiting for instructions is highly rated by teachers. And equally, that was the thing that the teaching assistants really enjoyed, because that enables a teacher sometimes to focus on the class, knowing that their teaching assistant will independently adhere to the classroom tasks. Actions speak louder than words. Therefore, this trust and reliance develops over time. So keep your eyes open for opportunities through the day to help different students and support the teacher in the best possible way. Tip number 1. Tip number 2. Flexibility is another key attribute of an efficient teaching assistant. Adapting to meet a teacher's unique needs each day will ensure that lessons are carried out according to their plans and ensure that pupils engage in productive learning experiences. So be willing to change your plans depending on the teacher's day plan. Make sure you adapt your activities to meet individual children's needs. Tip number 2. Tip number 3. Good professional working relationships develop between teaching and teaching assistants when they collaborate and effectively to achieve intended learning outcomes. This involves teaching assistants getting to know the teacher's unique style of teaching, pedagogy, personal ideology, classroom management techniques. So observe the teacher vigilantly and ask them what they expect from you so that you can be efficient, not necessarily replicate, but learn from their style and sometimes mirror their style so that the children are aware. That's my tip number 3. I've got a few more than 5 actually. Tip number 4. Fostering personal relationships with students is vital for the role of an effective teaching assistant because pupils often work more effectively in an atmosphere where the classroom is more positive, where they feel comfortable amongst the staff. Also, comprehending the student's unique background and academic capabilities can help you as a teaching assistant support children appropriately and really endorse personalised learning. So my tip number 4 there is get to know your students' backgrounds and abilities and ensure you support them effectively and according to their unique needs. Tip number 5, communication is key when working in schools because it needs to be clear, appropriate, but also sensitive and empathetic. Intrapersonal skills are paramount for teaching assistants as you engage with individuals of various ages and various abilities. For example, students who require academic as well as emotional support may need a slightly different conversational style, whereas conversations among work colleagues may need a slightly different style, more professional. So we need to think about those professional and personal communication styles that we use. So tip number 5 is alter the tone of your voice, your body language, according to the individuals, the groups, the pupils that you are addressing. Tip number 6. Teaching assistants should attain a good level of subject knowledge. I can't emphasise that enough. If you're going to be working with higher level students, even your lower level students, you want to move those children along that continuum of learning. It can enhance students' understanding of learning and enhance the differentiation is very difficult, we know, for teachers. Therefore, teaching assistants who are familiar with differentiation, with the education system, with the content of the education system are very valued because that helps you support a student more effectively, especially those with additional needs. So, research the curriculum, research the school's policies that the school follows, revise the subject content of your knowledge so you can correctly answer any questions that the students may have. Tip number 7, being creative and innovative are key characteristics for teaching assistants because quite often you might be asked to create a display, you might be asked to organise school small group activities. New and innovative ideas are always welcome because they heighten the delivery of the curriculum and engagement. They motivate children on their journey. Educational technology is a key here for contemporary learning in our 21st century classrooms. So making sure that you're supporting the pupils and facilitating them to enjoyable learning experiences. Things like Quizlet, Quiz-on-Five, voting, apps, anything that uses iPad or Android technology is very useful here to support and engage some of those less or more reticent learners. So don't be afraid to experiment and try new ideas because your teachers will appreciate additional input, particularly where technology is involved. My next tip, thinking about having a positive outlook. Okay, so how do you maintain that positive outlook to get engaged with every task you're asked to do, that readiness to engage in messy or challenging activities, and provide practical support such as resources? That's highly valued by teachers. The tip there is just to be enthusiastic, and whatever the task is, whether it's mundane or arduous, grasp it and see it as part of your learning journey. Managing behaviour in the classroom is demanding for teachers, but when staff unite to employ the same level of discipline and behaviour management strategies, when children feel that it's consistent, then students' behaviour is likely to improve. So teaching assistants need to use your authority appropriately and work in accordance with the classroom teacher to encourage good behaviour in the classroom. So my tip there is making sure you're very well versed in any behaviour management strategies that your school uses, and try not to undermine each other. You need to be on the same page. And finally, a teaching assistant's role shouldn't be underestimated, because it actually, supporting teachers, actually supporting students requires hard work and dedication, a willingness to devote additional time and effort to ensure that the job is carried out to the best of your ability is a key characteristic of one of those outstanding teaching assistants. So working quickly, efficiently, and putting 100% into everything that you do. We know how important and valuable you are, and it involves more than just simply reading or listening to children read and constructing displays. We know teachers rely on teaching assistants to get involved during classroom activities, to reinforce subject knowledge taught in the classroom, to emotionally support pupils where necessary. By working together, teachers and teaching assistants can ensure students really engage in high quality learning experiences. So in conclusion, the effective deployment of TAs can make a difference between a child succeeding or failing. An outstanding TA is intuitive and responds to the needs of the children. As I've stressed all along here, it's important both that the teacher and the teaching assistant work together towards these learning outcomes. And we know that all children should be learning throughout. And so therefore children should be making progress through suitably challenging activities and questions. And your role as a teaching assistant is to try and support that and make sure we're engaging with that. And within that, and I can't stress this bit again, thinking time, that wait time is good, downtime is not. So actually making sure that children are on task, that understand their activities, giving them ample time to think, but not zone out and not disengage. So our key messages for today are, thinking about your role and the things that you do. I gave you a little bit of an opportunity there to think about some of the things you might change. Maybe people might want to chat about that later, or you might want to engage with some of our future training. It might be that you've started to think about what you actually do as part of your role, how you contribute to the overall success of the school and the classroom that you work in, and how you have a positive impact on the outcomes for children. Which one of those 6 key support structures do you use through to the relaying from the safeguarding? Are there any there that you might want to try in the future? Or do you need more information about that? And preparedness. We know well-prepared teachers, well-prepared teaching assistants will make sure we have the best outcomes for the children. Failing to prepare is to prepare to fail. So again, thinking about your tasks, what you actually do, your overview of your role, think about what you actually do and how you contribute to those outcomes for children, and thinking about how you prepare yourself for improving outcomes for children. So let's just think about how we get this right. What are you going to do tomorrow? What's going to change as a result of today? As you're probably aware, in the UK, we have CPD, Continuing Professional Development Standards. And CPD always has to be linked to current and future practice. So thinking about what will you change as a result of this hour-long webinar. I know it's been very short, and we've covered quite a lot of ground. But what are you going to do as a result of this tomorrow? And let's not just think about tomorrow, let's think about next week and next term. What are your goals? What's going to change as a result of this changing, of this training? And what impact is this going to have on you, on the teacher that you work with, and the children that you support? So what I want you to do now, little practical activity, is write down 3 key messages you're going to take away with you from today. What are the 3 key things I've spoken about that resonate with you? Then identify one thing you'd like to discover more about and consider how you might gain more knowledge about it. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'm going to mute myself and give you a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to come back and just move up to the question and answer. Welcome back. Okay, so hopefully you've identified 3 things that you're going to take away from today's training. One thing that you'd like to discover more about, and think about how you may gain more knowledge. As you're probably aware, exit slips are good assessment for learning practice. And you'll notice that I have used some assessment for learning tips along the way during this webinar. Key to being an outstanding teaching assistant is your use of good assessment for learning, and we will cover that at a later date. So let's just think about what could you do next. So we're going to be hosting a series of webinars. They're 3-hour webinars, and they're on twice a day. So our first one is classroom management. Then we've got the planning cycle of thinking about planning, teaching, and evaluating. And how you support teachers with that, but also how you plan for your own small interventions. Then we're going to be thinking about understanding of SEN. Our next one is about lesson delivery and engaging with the children, which will involve more about behaviour management. We're going to do a whole 3-hour session on assessment for learning, because I think that's key to being an outstanding teaching assistant, is thinking about, I've got over 70 different ideas for you as to how you might use assessment for learning. Linked to that, the next one would be developing questioning. I think I've sort of given a bit of a flavour of questioning, but it's quite detailed, thinking about different types of questions, how that fits into higher order questioning, going down the sort of taxonomy of questions. And then developing the plenary. I think, the feedback, the plenary, getting children to be able to demonstrate their learning is really important. So a good session on how we develop that, what that looks like, and key things for you to use. And the very last one is marking and feedback. So different ways of using marking and feedback, looking at peer-to-peer support, looking at your marking, looking at teachers' marking, and looking at feedback to the students, to additional adults, and to teachers. So we will be covering those in quite a lot of depth. There will be 3-hour sessions, and they will be on twice a day. So I do hope some of you might want to engage with that learning, and I look forward to being able to speak to some of you at a later date. So, any questions? I'm going to hand over to Georgie, who's fielding the questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melody. There's been so much great information and ideas and thoughts and concepts that you've shared with us today. I think everyone's pretty blown away with that, actually. You know, there have been sort of few sort of discussions. People are saying that it's been such a useful webinar and the strategies have been very, very beneficial. So if anyone would like to actually share any questions for Melody here, then please, this is your opportunity to share them. I know I used to be a teacher, and I completely could not have done my role without the valuable teaching assistants that I had in the classroom. I particularly love the concept of actually thinking about how you can flex the system to build in that planning time around the assemblies, for example. A great idea. Often we were just sort of stood at the back of the classroom while the assembly was taking place, so that's a wonderful kind of concept. And the things about, you know, realizing your value and your contribution in the classroom as well, as a TA, like ensuring that you should be vigilant and working as a team. So I think there are lots and lots of opportunities, as you shared, that we have got these different modules that are taking place over the whole of the rest of this term, and we are hoping to actually repeat them next year as well. You know, we can dip in and out and sort of identify the sessions that might be most relevant to you, but they will be fully interactive. They will be over 3 hours with sort of a break in between. But please do drop us an email at events@ecis.org if you'd like to know more information. I have shared the link on here throughout as well. As mentioned, we have recorded today's session as well, so we will be making sure that we send that out to you with sort of any further resources that Melody has here. We haven't actually got any questions at the moment, Melody. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close and wrap up?
Thanks, Georgie. I think the main thing to say is obviously the 3 hour sessions will be a lot more interactive and collaborative, because I mean that's my style, is sort of active involvement in training. And we're all new to this sort of new Zoom technology and doing things remotely, both from, you know, actually teaching in our classrooms, but to also delivering training and CPD. But I have been doing this for quite a long time now, over 6 months. So I do try and use the chat rooms and the breakout rooms to try and make it as interactive as possible, so that people take away. And the other thing is, you know, each of those follow-up sessions will involve takeaways for you to use within the classrooms. So they're not just theory-based lectures, they're sort of things which you can use on a day-to-day basis and feel that you're actually improving your professional practice. So I do hope some of you might choose to join us on some of those sessions, but thank you.
That'd be brilliant, Melody. I do sort of really advocate the concept of breakout rooms as well. The opportunity to actually pair up with individuals remotely. You may find that you actually buddy up with someone that you can continue working with after those sessions as well. We've heard of those examples. So I would highly recommend sort of attending those sessions. Thank you once again, Melody. So much content there. And I know that this is going to be watched quite hugely afterwards. We had sort of half of the people join today. And as I mentioned, please feel free to share this recording out to your colleagues as well, if anyone's interested. Have a wonderful
Georgie, I don't
day.
Know if you,
yes, sorry, go ahead.
If you want to send my email address out to people,
yes.
I'm happy to engage with them as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Melody.
So, if you use my Dragonfly email, then you know, obviously if anybody wants any further information on anything specific, I'm always enjoy working with schools around the world, so please do feel free to message me and get in touch.
That's wonderful, Melody. You've been an absolute star. I hugely appreciate that. A couple of people, I think I've had a couple of technical issues, but we are going to send out a recording afterwards as well, so hopefully everybody will be able to catch up and get to speed. So have a good day, everybody.
Thank you everybody.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.